In the previous video, we explored how government budgets, including the U.S. federal budget, are systematically harnessed to serve bureaucratic interests. The sheer volume of revelations, highlighting not only the corruption, but also the staggering ineptitude of Western bureaucratic institutions, has become so overwhelming that the scandals we used to find outrageous now seem almost trivial by comparison. But let's set that aside for now. In this video, we'll turn to something else, namely the new U.S. trade relations, and what's often referred to as the Trump Doctrine. On the surface, meaning as it appears to the press and to the average voter, Trump's position seems simple enough. America's getting screwed. Let's slap tariffs on goods from all over the world, teach them a lesson, and if that makes imports more expensive, even better. That'll make American-made products more competitive. We'll start producing more at home, and that's how we'll make America great again. That message, of course, is tailored to be understood and embraced by the least economically literate segment of Trump's base. What's curious, though, is that this version, the bumper sticker slogan, not the actual policy, is what most experts choose to critique. And not just left-leaning, pro-democrat economists and political analysts. It's their job to discredit the current direction, but also supposedly neutral observers. Experts argue that, historically, it's difficult, though not entirely impossible, to find precedents where raising customs tariffs has led to positive outcomes for the economy, whether in the short term or in the long run. In the short term, they say, higher tariffs result in price increases, reduced household welfare, lower consumption, including of domestically produced goods, and a slowdown in GDP growth. In the long run, tariff barriers create obstacles for companies that rely on imported components or that are integrated into global production chains as suppliers to higher-tier foreign manufacturers. These companies lose competitiveness. As for domestic firms that compete with importers, they may indeed ramp up production over time, but without pressure from international competitors, product quality tends to decline. These firms start falling behind global standards, and sooner or later the dam breaks. When it does, they lose their competitive edge and eventually go bankrupt. So, according to the experts, Trump's move to hand out tariffs to anyone and everyone is foolish, populist, and won't lead to anything good. And perhaps they're right. But in reality, the equation is far more complex and contains many more unknowns. Let's start with the fact that the U.S. is a relatively unique economy. It's almost self-sufficient. Imports make up less than 14% of GDP, exports less than 11%. First, the bulk of what the U.S. imports consists of finished physical goods with low added value, along with raw materials. Second, a major portion of U.S. exports is made up of services, primarily critical technologies, used in producing the very goods the U.S. then imports. Third, alongside its exports, the U.S. also exports a different kind of service. It acts as a global payment agent. The dollar facilitates more than half of all international transactions and reserves and underpins roughly 56% of the global securities market. The first point means that tariffs introduced by the U.S. will, by definition, have far less impact on its domestic market than they would in most other countries. The second point creates a trap for U.S. trade partners, with the partial exception of Canada, whose exports to the U.S. mostly consist of raw materials. If you impose tariffs on American exports to your country, you'll be making your own exported products more expensive and therefore less competitive by inflating the cost of the very technologies and tools needed to produce them. The third point is an enormous sector untouched by tariffs, except, perhaps in this one regard, the higher the tariffs, the greater the number of dollars involved in global transactions, which slows the system down slightly and increases the earnings of the U.S. as the issuer of that currency. And speaking of competitiveness, the U.S. exports advanced technologies to the world, leads in innovation, and dominates in implementation. Introducing tariffs will, of course, reduce competition, But when you're already the undisputed global leader in innovation and efficiency, the impact is far less dangerous than it would be for a country that's chronically behind. And let's not forget, free market competition only makes businesses stronger when it doesn't kill them outright. Detroit. And Glasgow didn't fail because they were overprotected. They were wiped out by unfiltered global competition. The absence of tariffs didn't help them improve. Maybe, just maybe, a certain level of protection would have given them a shot at a comeback. Or maybe not, we'll never know. That said, none of this changes the fact that the U.S. economy will take a hit from tariffs. It will. Tariffs will make the U.S. economy worse off. Just not nearly as much as they would for any other country that chose to go down this path. And besides, who said that the only relevant metric in making this decision should be the direct economic impact of tariffs on the U.S. economy? Not knowing what Trump actually thinks, we can reasonably assume the following. First, like any businessman, Trump likely doesn't see economic sanctions as an effective tool. Tariffs in place of sanctions are far better and more effective. Even those who oppose tariffs in principle would probably agree on that point. Trump seems to believe, rightly or wrongly, that's a separate debate, that the countries he's targeting with tariffs actually deserve sanctions. Second, what Trump is doing is technically called a trade war. And a war, any war, is a negative-sum game. For the past 200 years or so, wars haven't been fought so that the winner ends up richer, but so that the winner loses less than the loser, thereby increasing their relative competitive advantage. Trump may be placing a little too much faith in the alarmists who claim that the Chinese empire is rapidly closing the gap with the United States in terms of economic development, and that an economic war with China is not just necessary, but urgent. Such a war, the argument goes, will slow the U.S. down, but China, which would lose far more in a tariff war, why that is we'll cover in a different video, would fall further behind. Third, Trump is a businessman, and as any businessman knows, when a new CEO takes over a company, there are three things they absolutely must do: audit the spending and cut unnecessary costs, renegotiate contracts to secure better terms, and craft a strategy for acquisitions and market expansion. That's exactly what he's doing. In the previous video, we covered point 1. What we're discussing now is point 2. Fourth, a tariff is a form of taxation, and like any tax, it flows into the national budget. By design, the burden of a tariff is shared between buyer and seller. When a tariff is introduced, the final price doesn't go up by the full tariff amount. It rises by less, because part of the cost is absorbed by the foreign supplier. Trump's thinking, which he's stated publicly, is this: if you raise tariffs by amount X, and at the same time lower, say, personal income tax rates with an expected revenue drop of X, the federal budget stays neutral. But Americans walk away with more money because part of the tariffs are effectively being paid by foreign exporters. Trump may or may not fully account for the fact that retaliatory tariffs from trade partners work the same way, and some of that burden will fall on Americans. But he seems to believe, and he may be right, that A, the scale of retaliatory tariffs will be far smaller, and B, a disproportionate share of both the U.S. tariffs and the retaliatory tariffs will ultimately be borne by America's trading partners. In any case, U.S. tariff policy is a complex issue, and its outcomes don't fit neatly into the formulas found in high school economics textbooks. Let's wait and see where this experiment leads. If there's one thing America has always been good at, it's trying bold things and then deciding which ones to keep and which ones to throw out.